Hey everyone! Today I have an incredible story to share, one that might just change the way you look at spirituality and faith. It's about Amir Sadiq. Before we move on, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And if you love Jesus as much as we do, be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on inspiring content like this. Thanks for being here with us today. Can you tell us a little about your life before your near-death experience? Sure. I was working in the Seattle area at the time, specifically for King County, as a supervisor in the probation department of the juvenile courts. I really loved my job and was passionate about helping teenagers. I often said I would do this until I died, words I had no idea would take on such a literal meaning. It's interesting. What events were responsible for your near-death experience? It all started on May 5th, 2006. I had a kidney stone on my right side that got stuck. I had had kidney stones before, so I recognized the symptoms right away. How did you deal with this situation initially? At first, I thought I could deal with it, as I had with previous episodes. I expected the pain to gradually subside, but this time was different. The pain just wasn't subsiding. What did you do when you realized it wasn't getting better? I decided to go to the emergency room. To be honest, I wasn't too worried. I instinctively went in and said, "I have a kidney stone on this side." I knew the rule from past experiences. They would take me to a room, give me morphine, and the pain would subside. Did everything go according to plan at the hospital? A number of the doctors found that I also had a kidney infection and gave me antibiotics to treat it. They decided to keep me overnight and scheduled the operation for the next day. How was the operation? The surgery went as expected. They successfully broke up the stone. However, none of us realized that the antibiotics I was given were not treating the infection effectively. This sounds serious. What happened next? Breaking up the stones released the infection, essentially poison, into my bloodstream. I became septic and my body started shutting down. It wasn't just my heart and lungs. Everything began to fail. That must have been an incredibly frightening moment. What do you remember about it? It was a harrowing experience, one that completely changed my life. You know, what amazed me most was how little fear I felt when I realized I was dying. As a born-again Christian, I've always believed that when you die, you go to heaven. So in that moment, all I could think was, I'm going home. What happened after that? According to the medical records, I was clinically dead for about an hour and 45 minutes. But what I experienced during that time was entirely different. I remember leaving my body and ascending rapidly, through the hospital floors, into the blue sky, and even into outer space. It was unbelievably fast. How would you describe the speed? It's hard to put into words, but there's a verse in the Bible that says, "To be absent from the body is to be in the presence of the Lord." That's exactly how it felt. It was instantaneous. By the time my top eyelid could meet the bottom, I was already in heaven. That's extraordinary. What did you see as you traveled? As I moved through that realm, I saw what some might call a light at the end of a tunnel. For me, it looked more like a window. I'm not saying it was literally a window, but that's the closest way I can describe it. What happened when you reached this window? When I came through, it was as though everything was perfectly right. There was nothing out of place, no stress, no agitation, nothing that could upset you. It was complete peace. How did that feel to you? The most striking thing was realizing how perfectly I belonged. I hadn't even been aware of feeling out of place before, but in heaven I felt truly at home. I knew without a doubt that I was welcome there. When you say welcome, what do you mean? I mean everything, literally everything in heaven was glad I was there. It wasn't just God, Jesus, or the Holy Spirit welcoming me. Even the environment itself seemed to celebrate my arrival. I looked at the trees and they felt welcoming. The flowers too. They exuded joy that I had come. That sounds incredible. What was your main desire at that moment? Once I arrived, the strongest desire I felt was to see Jesus Christ. I wanted to meet him face to face. That longing was so deep and clear to me. I realized heaven isn't just about the place. It's about being with the person of Jesus. Can you describe your journey to meet him? I found myself in a forest, surrounded by trees. Somehow I just knew Jesus was beyond them. As I moved forward, the trees began to part for me. What was that experience like? It felt as though the trees themselves were rejoicing. It was as if they were saying, "He's going to see the King! He's going to see the King!" That's exactly what it felt like, a profound and joyful celebration of my journey to him. And then what happened? I stepped into a large clearing, an open space, and there he was, Jesus. He was standing slightly to my left, looking toward a group of angels and what I call redeemed people, those who had lived on earth and had now made their way to heaven. What was your reaction when you saw Jesus? As I approached him, I didn't stand or walk up to him. Instead, I got so close, then dropped to my hands and knees. My eyes were fixed on his feet. Can you describe what you saw? Jesus was still facing the immense crowd before him, a multitude of angels and redeemed souls that seemed to stretch endlessly. I could see the side of his feet, and as I raised my head just slightly, I caught glimpses of his legs, but I didn't see his face at that moment. What were you feeling in that moment? All I could think was, you did this for me. Every fiber of my being knew the only reason I was in heaven was because of what Jesus had done. My heart was overwhelmed with gratitude for his sacrifice. How did you express your gratitude? The only words I could manage were, thank you, thank you, thank you, over and over. I couldn't stop. I was completely overcome with thankfulness. What realization did you have as you thanked him? It struck me deeply that the only reason I was there was because of him. I knew in my head that he had done this for everyone, but in that moment, it felt so personal, like he had done it all just for me. It wasn't a selfish thought, it was simply how deeply I felt his love and sacrifice. What did you do next? I began looking up at him, starting from his feet. His feet loved me. Then I looked at his ankles, they loved me. His calves, his knees, every part of him radiated love for me. Even his hands were full of love. And when you finally saw his face, when I looked into his face, I'll never forget what I saw. He looked at me as if I had never, ever disobeyed him. Not even once in my entire existence. That gaze still moves me to this day. That must have been overwhelming. What did that look mean to you? It made me truly understand what forgiveness means. In the Bible, it says when God forgives, he forgets. I felt the truth of that in his eyes. It was as if every mistake I'd ever made was completely erased. At that moment, I knew without a doubt that I was an eternal being. My body had died, but the real me, the person inside, would never die. That's a profound realization. What happened next? After our interaction, Jesus imparted some things to me, like a download of wisdom and understanding if I had to describe it. Then he looked at me and said, "No, it's not your time. Go back." Just like that, with such clarity and finality. And that was it? Yes. In that instant, I was sent back, but the memory of that moment and his love has stayed with me ever since. How did you feel when you were told to go back? I was surprisingly okay with it. I remember not retracing my steps through the forest to leave heaven. Instead, I went over it. It felt like flying. Can you explain what you mean by flying? It's not like flying as we think of it on Earth. It's more like deciding, I want to be 10 feet above the ground, and instantly, you're there. It reminded me of when Jesus walked on water. There's no fear, and you can move as high or as far as you want with complete ease. That sounds incredible. What happened when you reached the place where you were supposed to leave? When I arrived at the spot where I knew I'd leave heaven, it wasn't like there was a door or gate. I just knew that the next step I took would take me out of that realm. I stood there for a while, sensing that my body wasn't ready yet, and I was filled with joy at that realization. What did you do next? I turned around, excited, and said, "Yes!" I looked at the forest again, knowing Jesus was on the other side. But instead of heading straight back, I decided to explore. I went to the left of the forest, and all of creation around me was filled with joy. What did you see during this exploration? I saw mountains, but they weren't like mountains on Earth. They moved like waves in the ocean, rolling gracefully past me. It was breathtaking, such beauty and motion. I was completely captivated, thinking to myself, I must be staying here. What happened after that? Eventually, I knew I needed to return to Jesus. This time, I approached him from another direction, circling behind him, before coming back to the same spot where I'd first bowed before him. Once again, I knelt at his feet. Did anything stand out during this encounter? Yes, I noticed the light coming from him. It was extraordinary. This brilliant light wasn't just shining. It wrapped itself around me like a warm, loving embrace. What happened after that? He looked at me again with those indescribable, loving eyes. Then he said the same words as before. "No, it's not your time. Go back." How did you feel this time? Oh, I still didn't want to leave. I went over the trees again, back to the edge where I knew I'd step out. But once more, I realized my body still wasn't ready, and I thought, yes, I get to stay longer. What did you do with your extra time? This time, I decided to explore the right side of the forest. That area felt more connected to water, rivers, seas, and streams. It was amazing to see how vibrant the colors were, especially the blues, which were deeper and more alive than anything I'd ever seen. What else did you experience on that side? I saw saints, met incredible animals, and experienced so many wonderful things. There are so many animals in heaven, and they're all filled with life and joy. Everything I saw radiated beauty and peace. That's fascinating. What happened after this exploration? I found myself back with Jesus again, returning to the same spot as before, looking at his feet. But this time, something shifted. As I looked up, I noticed something I hadn't seen clearly before. My family. Can you tell us more about seeing your family? I saw my grandmother Mary standing at the front of a group. Behind her were other relatives, and behind them were even more. Generation after generation of family members who had a connection with Jesus Christ and the Father. They had all come to welcome me. That must have been emotional. Had you noticed them earlier in your experience? Now I realize they were there the first and second times I stood with Jesus, but I hadn't focused on them then. My attention had been entirely on Jesus. This time, though, I shifted my focus to them after looking at him. How would you describe their appearance? It's hard to explain because time doesn't exist in heaven. I described them as radiant, with glowing smiles and pure joy. Later, I thought to myself, wow, I got to see my entire family in heaven smiling and enjoying each other. I've never seen anything like that on earth. That sounds beautiful. Did this change how you understand family in heaven? Yes, it completely transformed my perspective. I used to think that in heaven we're all simply one family of God. While that's true, I learned that our earthly families remain deeply important to God. Heaven celebrates those relationships in ways I hadn't imagined. Were there any surprises about who you saw there? Yes, there were people I didn't expect to see. I had assumed they wouldn't be in heaven because they didn't meet my criteria for who qualifies. But they met God's criteria, which is all that matters. What is God's criteria, in your understanding? It's simple, accepting Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. That's the only standard God asks of us. So after this encounter with your family, what happened next? My family welcomed me. Jesus imparted so much knowledge into me, and I experienced the incredible unity of all heaven worshiping God together. Then all of a sudden, Jesus looked at me again and firmly said, "No, it is not your time. Go back." How did you feel about that command? It felt as though all of creation stepped aside, saying, "He's not talking about us. He's talking about you." In that moment, I felt like a soldier, similar to my time in the Air Force. It was as if I stood at attention and responded, "Yes, sir." Did you sense why you were being sent back? I felt as though Jesus was saying, without using words, "I need you there more than I need you here." That's what I understood in my heart as I prepared to leave. Did anyone else speak to you at this point? Yes, my grandmother Mary was there. As Jesus was telling me it wasn't my time, she looked at me and said, "Bring as many of us back with you as you can." She was referring to our entire family here on earth. That's a powerful message. What happened next? I bowed before Jesus again, crossed back over the trees, and reached what I call the edge of heaven. I took a step, and just like that, I was out, heading back to this world. How did you feel about returning? I felt heartbroken, like a baby crying uncontrollably. When I came back into the hospital room, I saw myself hovering above my body. The medical team had stopped working on me and was putting things away. The doctor had even begun signing the death certificate. Did you gain any insight about our earthly relationships and how they continue in heaven? Yes. When I saw my family in heaven, I recognized them instantly and felt a deep, pure connection. Our love for each other was perfect and untainted, free from the misunderstandings or conflicts we sometimes face on earth. In heaven, relationships are centered on our shared connection with God, which brings unity and peace. You mentioned that you didn't want to come back. Can you tell us more about your return to your body? After Jesus told me a third time that it wasn't my time and that I had to return, I began to understand my purpose. My grandmother's words about bringing as many people back with me as possible gave me a sense of mission. As I left heaven, I felt myself moving incredibly fast again, just like when I entered. When I reached the hospital room, I saw my body lying there. The medical staff had stopped trying to revive me and were preparing to conclude their work. I hovered above my body for a moment, then re-entered it. What happened when you re-entered your body? The moment I returned to my body, the heart monitor began to beep again. The medical team was shocked, but immediately sprang into action. They intubated me and got me breathing again. It was a jarring transition from the peace and joy of heaven to the physical reality of my weakened body. How did you feel physically after this experience? Physically, I was drained. My body had been through so much, having been clinically dead for about an hour and 45 minutes. Recovery took time, but spiritually and emotionally, I felt renewed. I had a clear sense of purpose. How has this experience changed your life moving forward? It changed everything. I now see life, death, and eternity through a new lens. I've come to appreciate how short our time on earth is compared to eternity. Every moment feels precious. I live with a deeper focus on loving others and sharing God's love. I no longer fear death, but I also cherish the gift of life and the mission God has given me here. Each day, I aim to live with purpose and to help others understand the depth of God's love. You mentioned living with a greater sense of purpose now. Can you elaborate on that? Absolutely. Experiencing heaven and hearing my grandmother's message to bring as many of us back with you as you can gave me a profound sense of responsibility. I feel compelled to share my story and help others understand the reality of heaven and the depth of God's love. I strive to live each day with the understanding that what we do here matters for eternity. Has your near-death experience affected your relationships with others? It's had a huge impact. I now see every person as someone who is deeply loved by God, just as I felt His overwhelming love for me. This perspective has made me more patient and compassionate, and it drives me to share the love and peace I experienced in heaven. I also value my family relationships more deeply, knowing their significance not just on earth, but in eternity. You mentioned seeing animals in heaven. Can you tell us more about that? Yes, it was incredible. I saw so many animals in heaven, some that we know on earth and others I had never seen before. They seemed to be everywhere and had a special place there. What stood out was how harmonious everything was. The animals were in perfect peace, reflecting God's care for all of His creation. Did you interact with any of the animals? Not directly. My focus was on Jesus and my family, so I didn't engage with the animals. But I could sense their joy and peace, just like the rest of heaven. They seemed to praise God in their own unique way, which was beautiful to witness. You've talked about the beauty of heaven. Can you describe it in more detail? It's hard to put into words because nothing on earth compares. The colors were more vibrant than anything we know. The light wasn't harsh. It was soft, warm, and inviting, and it seemed to emanate from everything. Everything felt alive. The trees, flowers, and even what looked like inanimate objects had a life of their own. It was all perfectly harmonious. There was no decay or imperfection. It was beauty on a level I could never have imagined. You mentioned that Jesus downloaded information into you. Can you explain what you mean by that? It's difficult to explain, but it felt like knowledge was being placed directly into my mind and spirit without the need for words. I suddenly understood profound truths about God, heaven, and life that I had never grasped before. Some of this knowledge faded when I returned to my body, but much of it has stayed with me, continuing to guide me every day. Can you share any specific insights you gained from this download? One of the most profound revelations I received was a deeper understanding of God's love. I thought I had a grasp on it before, but what I experienced was infinitely greater than anything I could have imagined. I also gained clarity about the nature of eternity, the significance of our choices on earth, and the reality of spiritual warfare. Some of the insights are hard to express. They're concepts that go beyond what our earthly minds can fully comprehend. You mentioned spiritual warfare. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, I became acutely aware of the presence of spiritual forces, both good and evil, that are constantly at work in our world. Many of the challenges and struggles we face have a spiritual dimension that we often overlook. This realization has made me more intentional about prayer and relying on what the Bible calls the full armor of God. Has your experience changed how you view death? Completely. I no longer fear death at all. I understand now that it's not an end but a transition to something far more beautiful than we can imagine. That said, I'm not in a hurry to die. I know God has a purpose for me here, and I want to fulfill it. But when my time comes, I'll look forward to returning to heaven with peace and anticipation. Has your perspective on time changed? Yes, profoundly. In heaven, there was no concept of time as we know it. Everything felt like an eternal present. This has helped me see how temporary our struggles and challenges on earth really are. It's also made me more intentional about how I use my time here, knowing that every moment is a gift with eternal significance. You mentioned that you saw people in heaven that you didn't expect to see. How has this affected your view of salvation? It's been a humbling experience. I realize that God's grace and mercy are far greater than we often comprehend. Salvation isn't about living a perfect life or adhering to a strict set of rules. It's about accepting Jesus and his sacrifice. This has made me much less judgmental, and I'm more cautious about making assumptions regarding someone's spiritual state. Only God knows the true condition of a person's heart. I appreciate your patience. You're right, there's more to share. Let me continue our conversation. You mentioned living with a greater sense of purpose now. Can you elaborate on that? Of course. After my experience in heaven and hearing my grandmother's message to bring as many of us back with you as you can, I felt a profound sense of responsibility. My purpose now is to share my story and help others understand the reality of heaven and the depth of God's love. Every day I strive to live with the awareness that what we do here has eternal significance. Has your near-death experience affected your relationships with others? Absolutely. I now see every person as someone deeply cherished by God, just as I experienced his love for me. This has made me more patient, compassionate, and eager to share the love and joy I encountered in heaven. My family relationships have also become even more meaningful to me, knowing how important they are both in this life and in eternity. You mentioned seeing animals in heaven. Can you tell us more about that? Yes, I was amazed by how many animals I saw in heaven. They were everywhere, and they seemed to belong there in a very special way. I saw animals we recognized from Earth, along with others that were unlike anything I'd ever seen. They existed in perfect harmony with each other and their surroundings. This made it clear to me that God treasures all of his creation, not just humans. That's fascinating. Did you interact with any of these animals? Not directly, no. I was so focused on being with Jesus and connecting with my family that I didn't engage with the animals, but I could feel their joy and peace, which reflected the overall atmosphere of heaven. It was as if even the animals were expressing their praise to God in their own unique way. You've talked about the beauty of heaven. Can you describe it in more detail? Words can't fully capture it, but I'll try. The colors in heaven were far more vivid and radiant than anything we know on Earth. The light was everywhere, warm, inviting, and alive. Every element seemed to have life, from the trees and flowers to what appeared to be inanimate objects. Everything existed in perfect harmony, untouched by decay or imperfection. It was a level of beauty beyond anything I could have imagined. You mentioned that Jesus downloaded information into you. Can you explain what you mean by that? It's difficult to put into words, but it felt like knowledge was being directly imparted to my spirit rather than spoken aloud. I suddenly understood things about God, heaven, and life that I'd never grasped before. Some of this understanding faded when I returned to my body, but much of it stayed with me. Can you share any specific insights you gained from this download? One of the most profound things I learned was a deeper understanding of God's love. I thought I understood it before, but the love I experienced in heaven was immeasurable, far beyond anything I'd ever known. I also gained clarity about the eternal significance of our earthly choices and the reality of spiritual warfare. Some insights are difficult to articulate. They go beyond what we can easily comprehend with our earthly minds. The experience was far more profound than I could have imagined. I also gained deep insights into the nature of eternity, the significance of our choices on earth, and the reality of spiritual warfare. However, some revelations are beyond words, concepts that are challenging for our earthly minds to fully grasp. You mentioned spiritual warfare. Can you elaborate on that? Yes, I became acutely aware of the presence of spiritual forces, both good and evil, working in our world. Many of the struggles and challenges we face have spiritual dimensions that we might not recognize. This realization has made me much more intentional about prayer and about embracing the full armor of God, as described in the Bible, to navigate these battles with faith and strength. Has your experience changed how you view death? Absolutely. I no longer fear death at all. I know now that it's not an end, but a transition into something infinitely more beautiful than we can imagine. That doesn't mean I'm in a hurry to leave this life. I believe God has a purpose for me here, and I want to fulfill that purpose. However, when my time does come, I'll look forward to returning to heaven with peace and joy. Has your perspective on time changed? Definitely. Time doesn't exist in heaven the way it does here on earth. Everything is an eternal present, free from the constraints of clocks or calendars. This understanding has helped me see how temporary our earthly struggles truly are in the grand scheme of eternity. It's also made me much more mindful of how I use my time here, knowing that every moment is a gift and carries eternal significance. You mentioned seeing people in heaven you didn't expect. How has this affected your view of salvation? It's made me much less judgmental. I realized that God's grace and mercy are far greater than we often understand. Salvation isn't about adhering to a strict set of rules or achieving perfection. It's about accepting Jesus and his sacrifice. Now, I'm much more cautious about making assumptions regarding someone's spiritual state because only God truly knows a person's heart. Has your experience affected your prayer life? Absolutely. Prayer has become much more vital and meaningful to me. Having encountered God's presence so intimately in heaven, I now approach prayer with the awareness that I'm truly communicating with a loving Father. I'm more open, honest, and expectant in my prayers, knowing that he hears and cares deeply. You mentioned that everything in heaven welcomed you. Can you describe that feeling more? It was the most profound sense of belonging I've ever experienced. On earth, it's common to feel out of place or not good enough, but in heaven, those feelings don't exist. Everything around me, the grass beneath my feet, the air I breathed, the light that surrounded me, seemed to echo a message of unconditional acceptance and love. It was as if all of creation was saying, "You're home, and you're meant to be here. You belong here. We're so happy you've arrived." It was an overwhelming feeling of acceptance and love. Has this experience changed how you view your body? Yes, it has. I came to realize that while our physical bodies are important, they're just temporary vessels for our eternal spirits. In heaven, I felt more myself than I ever had in my physical body. It shifted my focus away from physical appearance and made me more concerned with nurturing my spirit. You mentioned that the colors in heaven were more vibrant. Can you describe that further? It's hard to explain because the colors I saw don't really have words in our earthly language. Imagine the most vibrant blue you've ever seen, and then imagine that color being washed out by the sheer intensity of what I saw. There were colors, unlike anything we have here, colors beyond our earthly spectrum. Everything seemed to glow with an inner light, radiating beauty and vibrancy. Did you have any sense of the size or scope of heaven? Heaven felt both intimate and infinite at the same time. When I was with Jesus or my family, it felt incredibly close and personal. Yet there was this overwhelming sense of vast, endless beauty stretching out in every direction. It was as though heaven was as expansive as it needed to be to hold everything and everyone in perfect harmony. You mentioned the trees parting for you. Did you see other examples of nature behaving differently than it does on earth? Yes, everything in heaven seemed alive in a way that's hard to put into words. The mountains moved like gentle waves. The light itself seemed to have a life of its own, wrapping around me. Even things we consider inanimate on earth, like rocks or plants, seemed to have consciousness, all focused on praising God. Yes, I saw angels in heaven and sensed their purpose. They were constantly engaged in worship and fulfilling God's will. I came to understand that angels play a far more significant role in our lives than we often realize, but always in submission to God's authority. How has your experience impacted your relationships with non-believers? It's given me a greater sense of urgency to share my faith, but also a deeper patience and love for those who don't believe. I now understand that each person's journey is unique, and that God's love extends to everyone, no matter where they are in their faith. I try to share my experience in a way that invites others in rather than pushing them, always respecting their free will. Did you gain any insights into the nature of free will and God's sovereignty? This is a profound question, but I did gain some understanding. I sense that God's sovereignty and human free will work together in a way that's difficult for us to fully comprehend. I understood that God's love is so great that he allows us to make real choices, even when those choices might cause pain or harm. But he's always working to bring good from every situation. Did you gain any insights into the nature of evil or the presence of suffering in the world? While I didn't encounter any evil in heaven, I gained a deeper understanding of its nature by contrast. The perfect goodness and love I experienced there made the reality of evil and suffering on earth even more apparent. I came to understand that evil is the absence of God's goodness, a distortion of his perfect creation. This reinforced for me the importance of bringing God's light into the darkness of this world. How has your near-death experience affected your fear of death or dying? It has completely removed any fear of death. I now see death not as an end, but as a beautiful transition to something beyond what we can imagine. That doesn't mean I'm in a rush to die. I believe God has a purpose for me here, and I want to fulfill that. But when my time does come, I'll embrace it with peace, knowing what awaits. What message would you like people to take away from your experience? I want people to know that God's love for them is far greater than they can ever imagine. Heaven is real, and it's more beautiful and perfect than we can grasp. Our choices and actions on earth matter for eternity. And most importantly, I want people to understand that a relationship with Jesus is what prepares us for eternity. It's not about being perfect or following a set of rules, but about accepting his love and forgiveness. Thank you for sharing your incredible story with us. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude? I just want to emphasize that while my experience was profound and life-changing, the most important thing isn't my story, but God's story of love for humanity. My hope is that by sharing what happened to me, others will be encouraged to seek God for themselves and to live with an eternal perspective. Thank you for letting me share my experience. Your story is truly remarkable and gives us all much to reflect on regarding life, death, and what comes after. Thank you once again.